This is Keith McDaniel, and today is July the 24th, 2026, and I am on the campus of Oak Ridge National Laboratory, and today I'm talking to Dr. Stephen Streiffer. Dr. Streiffer, thank you for taking time to talk to me.
Oh, pleasure to be here. Thank you for taking the time.
Sure. So, before we begin, tell me, what is your title?
So I am director of Oak Ridge National Laboratory and CEO of UT Battelle.
Oh, is that right? Okay.
Yeah, so the interesting thing about the outcome of the Manhattan Project is one of the things that came out of that is there's a realization that operating the national laboratories a little bit of an arm's length from the federal government would be a good thing. Mm-hmm. So they created this thing called the management and operations model for managing the lab, where they were actually run by contractors for the federal government, not run for the federal government.
Sure.
So Oak Ridge National Laboratories, I'm sure you know, is managed by UT Battelle on behalf of the Department of Energy.
Sure.
So I'm actually a UT Battelle employee, a contractor to the government, but delighted to be director here.
All right. Well, good. Well, I was telling our friend over here that I've done 25 of these this summer in my off time, and so you are by far the highest ranking person that I've interviewed so far. I've interviewed some pretty high ranking folks, but I'd say you take the cake. So, and we appreciate it. This is about you. These interviews, these oral history interviews, are about the person. So let's start at the beginning. Tell me about you. Tell me where you were born and raised.
So I'll give up the secret. I was born in 1966, so just hit 60 years old this year.
Okay.
And was born and raised in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. So my mother and father were chemistry graduate students at Louisiana State University. Mm-hmm. They got married, and my mom got pregnant, and my father decided he had to stop being a graduate student and get a real job. Mm-hmm. So he went to work for actually the first computing center at Louisiana State University back when I was born as a result of that. And one of the stories he likes to tell is back in the days when computer hard drives used to look like washing machines, he would take me to work and put me to sleep by putting me in my bassinet on top of the hard drive that would then vibrate me to sleep. So I've been around technology all my life, literally since I was born.
Sure, sure. So did you have any siblings growing up?
Yeah, I've got two brothers and a sister who's quite a bit younger than I am, and all in different areas, different fields. But it's oldest child, but not the only child.
Now, did you, when you were growing up, or when you were in high school, did you have any idea of really what you were interested in, what you wanted to do?
I cannot ever remember a time in my life where I wanted to do anything other than be a scientist. Okay. And I can't tell you why. Even as a kid, I remember going into the garage after raiding the cabinets underneath my mother's kitchen. Underneath the sink in my mother's kitchen to find cleaning chemicals that I could go mix together and see what happened. And it just stuck with me. One of my first memories was actually my father taking me to our next door neighbors to watch the moon landings on TV. And I was just of that generation where with the Apollo mission, science and technology was representing just such a wonderful frontier for humanity. And that's always what I wanted to do. And even through middle school and high school, it was not a question of whether I was going to be a scientist, but what I wanted to do with that. And wound up actually a material science at the end. But it was always my passion.
Did you have any, when you were in middle school, high school, did you have any opportunities to practice science? I mean, did you have good teachers? Did it have good programs where you went to school?
They did. So this was also a very interesting time in the state of Louisiana. So I was actually hitting middle school as the last vestiges of desegregation and the forced desegregation of the Louisiana school system was happening. And one of the results of that was that Baton Rouge created magnet schools to try and pull people together. So I had the fortune of going to Baton Rouge High School, which still exists. It was one of the first magnet schools in Louisiana. And just had wonderful teachers, had access to math and science classes that I would not have gotten in other parts of the Louisiana educational system. And that stayed with me. I had particularly math teachers that I still remember. I had the advantage of having really strong biology and physics classes, even at the high school level, that I think did a good job of preparing me for college and graduate school.
So where did you go to college?
I went to college at Rice. It was close enough to home to be close, but far enough away.
Is that in Houston?
It's in Houston, exactly. It was 4 hours from Baton Rouge, and that was just about the right distance where I could come home if I wanted, but, couldn't just do it on a whim. Started off in electrical engineering, which turned out I hated. One of the things I discovered out of that is scientific disciplines are kind of like languages. And if you don't know a language and you listen to somebody speak it, you pretend like you know what they're saying. And it's not till you really learn a language that you actually understand it and you go, that's what that word means. That's what that series of sounds means. So I wanted to be an electrical engineer, but once I started to take electrical engineering classes, I found out that was not for me.
Okay.
And fortunately, one of the courses that I had to take as part of that curriculum was an introductory material science course, and I loved it. And changed majors and never looked back.
Okay. There's nothing wrong with that. When you're in college, you really don't know until you try something out.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
Exactly.
So you got your degree in material science, and then I guess you got a graduate.
Yeah, then I continued west. I went to Stanford University and was there for 5.5 years and got my graduate degree there. And again, people were really important. It turned out that one of the mentors that I had at Rice, interestingly enough, was a guy named George Farr. George Farr had gotten his PhD from Stanford not long before he moved to Rice and became a faculty member there.
Oh.
And George taught a lot of the classes I took, and he didn't ever push Stanford on me, but he certainly made it clear that Stanford was a good place to go, and that's where I wound up. Very interestingly, George then subsequently left Rice and came to Oak Ridge National Laboratory in UT, where he was here for a long time. He left here and then went to Texas A&M a number of years ago, but it's interesting how we've sort of traced each other's footsteps.
Sure. So now, when you were in graduate school, were you working?
I had the fortune of being, at that point in time and still continuing, in a scientific discipline that there was enough of demand for. So, when I was in graduate school, it was, I was supported by grants as part of those grants. That was the other nice thing about Rice at that point in time. It was actually still an affordable university. And that was also one of the reasons I chose it.
Yeah.
But I think one of the things that people underappreciate about science and technology degrees is if you're good in areas that are in demand, particularly if you go for a PhD, somebody else will pay for it.
Oh, is that right?
And that's one of the ways that we need to get more kids into STEM is realizing that it's not as expensive as an education as sometimes people think it is.
Yeah, sure. So did you have an area of specialty in material science?
Yeah, and I think it's a question I get asked a lot, particularly by early career people. How did you get to be lab director? And the first thing I always say when anybody asks me that question is I had no intention of ever being a lab director. That was never in my aspirations. And I feel very fortunate to have wound up someplace like Oak Ridge National Laboratory with just the amazingly wonderful portfolio of work that we do here. It's just an honor to come to work every day. But I got really interested in a particular characterization technique called electron microscopy. And that's really what I specialized in at Stanford was electron microscopy. My PhD career was from 1988 to 1993. So that was right after high temperature superconductors were discovered. So there are a lot of graduate students of my generation who worked on high temperature superconductors. That was the hot topic. So I was working on electron microscopy of high temperature superconductors for my dissertation.
Okay. So, from there, kind of walk me through your professional career.
So, finishing out the earlier thought, one of the things that's worked really well for me is I think I've done a good job of being reasonably good at two things at once. And getting back to my graduate degree, it was electron microscopy of high temperature superconductors. And when I finished my PhD, one of the things I really wanted to do was get out of the United States for a while. I'd lived my entire life here. There's a big world out there that I knew nothing about, and I really wanted to do a postdoc overseas. So I was fortunate to get a postdoctoral opportunity at one of the Max Planck Institutes in Germany in Stuttgart. So took that position doing electron microscopy on another class of materials called perovskite ferroelectrics. And that's worked well for me, where I've had two things that I've been working on, and every next job has been switching out one of those things. So I moved from electron microscopy on superconductors to electron microscopy on ferroelectrics. I actually wound up doing two postdocs to come back to the United States. I had to do a second postdoc so I could come back and actually have a job. That turned out to be doing ferroelectrics for semiconductor applications. And that turned into doing semiconductors using X-ray scattering. And then that led me down to eventually at that point in my career, ultimately to be the director of the Advanced Photon Source at Argonne, which is really the point in time in which there was no denying that I was a manager.
Right.
I remember very clearly the first time I walked into a lab and the postdocs came running at me, waving their hands, saying, "Don't touch it, you'll break it." And that's when I knew I'd jumped the fence. But it's that. So my career has been one where I've been able to have a couple of threads that I've been able to sort of exchange through each job and do new things that way and build up a broader set of experience I think I would have had otherwise.
You mentioned a while ago that each field is kind of like knowing a language.
Yep.
Well, obviously, I don't speak the language that you were just speaking this last time through. So, but I'm sure somebody will understand it. So you ended up at Argonne, and how long were you there?
I was at Argonne for 24 years. So
Wow.
I started out as an early career scientist in the material science division there. The Department of Energy ultimately launched a program that now is known as the Nanoscale Research Centers Program, Nanoscale Science Research Centers Program, where at several different national laboratories they built up facilities for nano research, nanoscience research. And got involved in Argonne's participation in that in a facility called the Center for Nanoscale Materials. Oak Ridge has a very similar facility here called the Center for Nanophase Materials Science, CNMS, which is up by the Spallation Neutron Source. And that got me into the Department of Energy scientific user facilities.
Okay.
And then my next job after that was as director of the Advanced Photon Source.
Okay.
Left that job. I was the deputy director for science and technology at Argonne for a couple of years, and then had an opportunity to move to Stanford University as the vice president for SLAC National Laboratory, or helping the university oversee SLAC National Accelerator Laboratory there.
Okay.
And got a call one day saying, "Would you be interested in the Oak Ridge job?" And turned out I was.
Turned out you were.
Yeah, and it's been a great fit.
Talk a little bit about that transition from being a scientist and a researcher into a more management over those kinds of areas. Well, what have been some of the things that have worked well for you and some of the challenges that you've faced over your career?
So I think there are a couple things that happen. So one of the reasons I went into a career in the National Laboratory is I was finishing up my second postdoc. Did I want to go to a university and be a faculty member? Did I want to move to industry and work in industry? Did I want to go into a national laboratory? And one of the things that kept me in the national lab system at that point in time was I really still liked doing experimental science. I liked being in the lab. I liked actually doing measurements, working at the Advanced Photon Source and actually collecting data and analyzing that data and being part of the scientific enterprise. And a couple things happen. One is kind of the obvious. You get to a point in time where, you have your first kid and the idea of staying up all night to complete an experiment is not necessarily at the top of your list anymore.
Sure.
And the other thing that starts to happen, which I hit at a certain point as well, is you get to the point where you have more ideas than you can do with your own two hands. Mm-hmm. And you start to say, well, okay, how can I have other people work on these topics with me? And that really drove me to to more the management and leadership side of the house, where there were things that I saw in the science community that I wanted to help accomplish, where leading groups of people was the right way to do it, and I could contribute more through that way than I could just by doing experiments myself.
Sure, and you're getting older, and
absolutely,
and you have developed the skills to be able to be effective in that role.
Yeah, and I think my parents, my mom passed away a number of years ago, but my father would still look at me and said, "I'd never expected you to be the extrovert in the room." But relative to a lot of science and technology people, I don't do badly with people.
Yeah.
And I think another good friend of mine also used to say that if we look at our training as scientists, everybody acknowledges that to be a scientist or to be an engineer, you have to have some aptitude for math, but you also have to take math classes. Mm-hmm. But then we turn around and say, yeah, if you're going to be a leader or manager, you either got it or you don't. And that's not true. I mean, people who move up through the ranks and take on management and leadership roles have to have some aptitude for the task. Mm-hmm. But there really is a lot that you can learn from other people and from through other types of continuing education. To really continue to build those skills,
and I imagine from mentors.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. But it continues to amaze me the number of scientists who either say you can be a manager, or you can't, you can never learn how to do it, and that's not true. The mentoring is a really important part of that, and it's I think absolutely crucial to success.
How does let's talk a little bit about the lab and the national lab system. I don't even know how many national labs we have in the U.S. But how do they work together? Mm-hmm. Okay, tell me about how that process works.
So the Department of Energy operates 17 national labs. And 10 of those are operated on behalf, stewarded by the Office of Science, and Oak Ridge National Laboratory is one of those. Mm-hmm. 3 of those are stewarded by the Applied Energy offices. One is stewarded by Environmental Management. Mm-hmm. And then the 3 remaining labs are run by the Nuclear National Security Administration, NNSA. Mm-hmm. And it's a little bit different in each of those different areas. So the National Security Laboratories, Los Alamos, San Diego, Livermore, obviously are responsible for designing and implementing, maintaining our nation's nuclear deterrent. Mm-hmm. And they've got a very clear mission focused around that with well-defined responsibilities at each of the laboratory, although there's always some friendly competition and sometimes some not-so-friendly competition.
Yeah.
The Office of Science, it's a little bit similar. There are 10 Office of Science labs, as I mentioned. We each have areas in which we have specialties. We each have user facilities that are unique, that we operate on behalf of the broader scientific community. And I think we do a good job of finding areas where collaboration between the national labs adds to the value proposition, makes it the proverbial sum being greater than the whole of the parts, the whole being greater than the sum of the parts.
Yeah.
And some of that is intentional on the part of the Department of Energy. Some of it is more organic, where we'll have a national need like reestablishing domestic supply chains. And Oak Ridge National Laboratory has a very strong collaboration with Ames in that area. Basically based on people at Ames and people at Oak Ridge knowing each other and saying, hey, if we work on this together, there's some really interesting things that neither of us would be able to do separately. So let's collaborate and really make the most of the capabilities we have at each laboratory.
Has it always been that way?
It has. I think the challenges the national labs are taking on definitely changes over time. And I think right now, we've got the intertwined problems of being able to provide the energy that the nation needs and the world needs worrying about things like domestic supply chains and the reality of international competition, which is becoming a very difficult topic in the very, very, very complicated world that we live in today. And other problems that are out there that include things like water security, food security, the way that we make civilization resilient against things that are happening with the weather. And all of these intertwine together, and I think are really the specialty of the national labs to work on these big, hard problems that take a sustained effort over a long period of time to really solve. And I think Oak Ridge is, at some level, I'd rather be lucky than good. And I think Oak Ridge has the advantage of being in the right place at the right time. With the work that we have, just enormous strengths in areas like nuclear fission, nuclear fusion, high performance computing, quantum computing, materials for extreme environments, and our great material science capabilities, the work that we do for applied energy, and the work that comes out of that we apply to the national security problems that the nation faces. The work that we do is very important. And this is a great opportunity just to be able to educate people a little bit more about how important the national labs are. And at the end of the day, it's your taxpayer dollars that are paying for this effort. So we do need to explain to people what it is we do and why it's so important.
I've heard people say before that, working as a researcher or a scientist, that you may work on something your entire life and you will never see the benefit from it. And I'm sure that goes on every day here, doesn't it?
It's a combination of both. And one of the things I really love about Oak Ridge National Laboratory is we do that fundamental research, which is often curiosity driven. We're wondering why something happens the way it does. And there may be no near-term obvious application of that. But on the other hand, we do very applied work where I can point to something and say, there's a widget that we designed, that we built, that we manufactured, that's sitting in the Browns Ferry nuclear power plant being irradiated as part of lifetime testing. And the thing I really love about this laboratory is I can take you to that applied work and I can say, okay, here's some applied work. And the way that we were able to do that is because we had this capability that was developed in the fundamental science that we do in this type of material that was supported by modeling and simulation that we do in the supercomputers here at the laboratory, that then wound up, and then you can pick it up and hold it in your hands. This part right here, which is a duplicate of the thing that's sitting in a nuclear reactor. So just because of the breadth of the portfolio here at Oak Ridge National Laboratory, it's really great to be able to demonstrate that full gamut of fundamental research to use-inspired research to things that matter tomorrow. And that's really exciting every day.
How is that? How are your areas of research and directed, and where does that direction come from? Is it external, internal?
It's a combination of both. So the Department of Energy always has a strategy that evolves over time based on what the national needs are. And a great example of that gets to what we refer to as the nuclear renaissance. It's clear now more than ever that we've just got to get electrons onto the grid. And nuclear fission, what we would call traditional nuclear energy, has got to be part of that mix. And we're seeing just a resurgence, not only here in Oak Ridge and East Tennessee, but around the nation in the deployment of nuclear energy. Hopefully in the not too distant future, that'll be fusion as well. Maybe about 2035, we'll actually have fusion plants on the grid. And the laboratory responds to those priorities. And we try to make sure that we develop talent, that we hire people, that we adapt our capabilities to what the Department of Energy and the nation see are the most pressing challenges. But at the same time, almost everything that we do traces all the way back to the Manhattan Project. A great example is if you're good at nuclear fuel, which is one of the capabilities that we developed out of the Manhattan Project, you're good at separating elements and complex mixtures, which you can apply to getting lithium for batteries, as an example. If you're good at nuclear fuel, you're good at nonproliferation, which is a huge national security concern. So I think you can trace almost everything that we do through one way or another back to the founding of the laboratory during the Manhattan Project. With evolution over time to keep up with the most important challenges. So it's a combination of sort of top down and bottom up, if you will.
How are you how's this entity developing talent? I mean, we look back at the history of this place, and we've got the names of people that have made significant contributions to science that just came from right here in Oak Ridge. They were our friends and our neighbors. Maybe people didn't know. What's being done to assure that those kinds of people are going to take up the mantle?
It's one of the things that really worries me, and it gets back, even to my story that we were talking about earlier. So much of what I see is the challenges that we face ultimately are a combination of a science and technology challenge and often a policy or a societal challenge. And nuclear energy is a great example. We know how to build nuclear reactors. The question is really, can we do it in a way which is cost affordable, and will the public support them? And we've got to be able to solve those challenges together. But I grew up at a time where it was kind of assumed that technology was going to help us solve these challenges. And if you look at what's happening now, I think there's a lot more questioning about whether science and technology is something that the U.S. should be investing in. And people who are coming up through the education system feel that. And I think the National Laboratory is a great example of where we can go out and demonstrate to people that what we do is important, what we do matters. The jobs that we have to offer are exciting and interesting and will lead to fulfilling careers. And you can actually have a family. You can actually afford to raise a family on the salaries that we pay. And that science and technology still matters. There are problems that are out there that we have a very direct impact on and a very direct hand in solving so that you can show the benefit of. And we've got to be able to convince the generation that's coming up through school right now that science and technology matters. And it doesn't matter what discipline you look at. If you look at the employment prospects in the United States, there's an increasing gap between the science and technology talent that we need and the graduates that are coming out of graduate school and undergraduate and even high school. And one of the things I really just am always in awe of are people like Randy Boyd and the investment that Randy has personally made in education in East Tennessee and making that affordable through things like the Tennessee Challenge and TN Achieves, and really holding up that prospect for a better life to people in a way that I think that's going to keep kids in science and technology.
Are you worried about the state of secondary education?
Yeah, my chief human resources officer, a guy named Brian Arrington, who I love dearly, he's just a really great guy. He will often walk in here and say, Stephen, you got to remember the people that are going to work here at Oak Ridge National Laboratory 20 years from now are in kindergarten right now. So it's not just primary education, it's not secondary education, it's the entire pipeline. Where in appropriate ways and at appropriate levels, we got to get to kids early and give them the math and science skills so that they succeed throughout that pipeline. And we need all the above. We need a few PhDs. I'm just as worried about mechanical engineers who help us build buildings. You name it, we need the technical talent.
Yeah. It kind of reminds me of a story I heard about. They said when prison planners are planning capacity for prison, they go to fourth grade reading level to see what the reading level is, because they know in about 10 years that's where the need is going to be at that point. So I guess that's what you all have to do, is you look early on and try to influence and motivate.
And that's why so many of the programs that we have at the laboratory that engage the community and that are part of our outreach effort are really about that early stage education. And I just had the opportunity today to come from an event over at ORAL where middle schoolers and high schoolers were doing 2-week internships to learn about what research is. And we've got to get started that early. We need to get people as excited as I was and keep them in the pipeline and make sure that they get through those STEM degrees, which are not easy. And we find ways that they can be supported, and mentoring is a large part of that as well. And that we have the workforce that the U.S. needs.
What are some of the big issues right now that Oak Ridge National Lab is working on? Some of the big efforts.
So I'll start off with the obvious one, which is nuclear. We've got this real opportunity where electricity use in the United States is growing again. We know we need new sources of energy on the grid, and we know that we need energy independence in a way that has been different than it's ever been before. And we've got this great opportunity to really rethink nuclear energy and to make it more manufacturable, make it more affordable, and to make it safer as well. It's already a safe technology, but there are things that we can do to make that safety easier and less expensive. The laboratory's got a huge effort on that, including fuels, so-called advanced fuels, which are easier to use in reactors, that I think are a huge part of what's going on right now. And that research has been going on at the laboratory for decades. Fusion is another thing just really excited about. I think the real breakthrough there has been a combination of advances in materials which can withstand the sorts of very extreme conditions, either in a fusion plant or in a fission plant, combined with our much better ability, our much more increased capability of doing modeling and simulation using high-performance computing, where it's getting to the point where we really can understand how to build a reactor. I continue to be excited about computing. But the issue with computing is it's about energy efficiency now. We can build big machines. We just need to build them more energy efficient. And computing and energy is the same problem. We need energy to do computing. We need computing to figure out how to get energy more available to people and to make the materials that will allow that to happen.
And I guess that's part of the whole data center thing that's going on.
Well, we're not so interested in data centers. We're interested in figuring out the technologies behind data centers to make those more energy efficient. But we're really about, how do we do high performance computing in a way which allows us to solve problems that have never been solved before. It's always exciting when you wake up in the morning and you think, we could actually do something that's never been done. That wasn't possible yesterday. That's a great place to come to work.
So what are some of the other things that y'all are maybe something that's you've been working on for a while that is about to come to fruition?
So one that I think is really exciting, and this dovetails with the Department of Energy and what they call the Genesis mission. So in the computing space, there's a convergence of a couple of things that have been happening for a long time, but really have seen transformational advances over the last couple of years. And those two things are artificial intelligence and quantum computing. And those are really changing the types of ways that we can process information and really make use of the computational horsepower that we have at our fingertips. And interestingly enough, the first Artificial Intelligence Institute at Oak Ridge National Laboratory was in 1979.
Wow.
Oak Ridge National Laboratory, and indeed the rest of the National Lab System, has been doing AI way before it was cool. And what's happened is in recent years, there have been advances in the technology that have just made that explode. And I'll go back to another story I love about the laboratory that comes back to that same point. In the early 2010s, there was this small company that worked on computer chips for gaming that partnered with Oak Ridge National Laboratory. If we could change some of the instruction sets on their chips, we would be able to use their chips in the next high-performance computer we were going to deploy, which was a machine called Titan. That company was NVIDIA.
Is that right?
So the reason that NVIDIA is where it is today is because of a partnership with Oak Ridge National Laboratory, because together we figured out how their chips could be used in high-performance computing. And that revolution is what's led to what we see today, where these big data centers, these big machines, can deploy AI that now can solve challenges that we didn't used to be able to think we could solve. But the challenge with that is those machines are not cheap. AI is very expensive. It's very energy hungry. It's very water intensive. So we have to come up with new ways for computing that are much better in that regard. And another area that the lab has had a long focus on is quantum computing. And it's just getting to the point where we're deploying quantum computers right now that are not toys, that are not scientific test systems, that really can start to solve challenges that we cannot solve with traditional high-performance computing.
And in the elevator speech, tell me what quantum computing is.
So quantum computing is using this weird thing that nobody understands. And I'm serious about that. When somebody finally figures out the way that this actually works, they will get a Nobel Prize for it.
Okay.
Whereby information is what's called entangled on something called a qubit.
Okay.
And what that allows us to do with quantum computing that uses these qubits is to explore many different answers to a computational problem all at the same time, as opposed to having to calculate them one by one by one. So a rough analogy of this is, I don't know if you've ever heard of the traveling salesperson problem. So if you have 10,000 packages that you're trying to deliver in Oak Ridge, and you're trying to figure out the best route to deliver those 10,000 packages, it turns out that is an exponentially hard problem to solve using traditional computing techniques. But quantum computers can figure that out all in basically one go. It can basically sample all of the different ways you could be able to deliver those 10,000 packages all at one time and be able to say, here's the best way, and just spit the answer out to you. So it's a revolutionary way that we've known about for a long time that if we can make it work will allow us to solve certain types of problems that traditional computing can't solve. Now, the converse is true as well. Traditional computing is still able to solve problems that quantum computers will never be appropriate for.
Okay.
So our view is that we combine the technologies exactly in the same way that NVIDIA worked with us to get these so-called graphical processing units, GPUs, into high-performance computing. We see a future where we have a computer where the scientist poses a problem to that computer. The computer says, I'll go run this piece on the quantum processor. I'll go run this piece on the AI processor. And this is a piece that I do traditional high-performance modeling and simulation on. And we combine all of that in a single architecture that's energy efficient and can answer problems that we can only dream about today.
Wow. How far away are we from that?
2 years.
Really?
I think it's coming fast.
Wow. Tell me about the relationship. How you mentioned NVIDIA. I know there's always been a relationship between the national labs and private companies. The technology transfer. There's all kinds of things. Talk a little bit about how that works.
So it's a little bit different than people often think it is, and it's a great question to probe a little bit more. So when we think about technology transfer, oftentimes we think about, again, going back to my time at Stanford, we think about Stanford and Google. These two students at Stanford had this idea that was spun out of the university, supervised by a faculty member, that became Google. So we have this idea that companies spin out of the intellectual environment and start up these new activities. And that's really not how it works at the National Laboratory. So one of the facilities that we have here is a place called the Manufacturing Demonstration Facility, where we really have some of the world's best engineers and scientists working on new ways to manufacture things, as you might guess from the name. And we have hundreds of companies who work with us where they will have a problem. They will come to the Manufacturing Demonstration Facility and they'll say, hey, we got this problem. The DOE funds us to support them in trying to figure that out. We work together to solve the problem, and then the industry takes that solution and takes it back and hopefully makes money off of it. And that model where we provide almost the intellectual horsepower to solve problems is really the best model that we have, I think. And we do that with computing as well. One of the big successes we have with our current machine, which is a machine called Frontier, is GE Aerospace has been designing new aircraft engines on that machine that promise to be much more fuel efficient than current jet aircraft are.
Oh, wow.
And it could save billions of dollars a year in fuel with the efficiencies that they have. And it's a combination of GE's private sector knowledge and our ability to operate these big machines and to understand the computer science that will help them solve the problem that allows the industry to then take the next step and actually make that into a business or make that into a product line and actually deliver something for customers.
So that's one of the main functions of the National Lab, is to be able to support private industry to help them get better and do better and
Increasingly, yeah. I think that's a mission that's become bigger over time. I think that's something that we see growing even more. But unless we're working on things that at the end of the day matter, we're not doing our job.
Yeah.
And it's a balance because sometimes we've got to keep, as we were talking about earlier, the curiosity-driven research, that blue-eyed dream in the, in the sky of, if we could do this, it would be wonderful. Or I wonder why this weird material does this strange thing. And we've got to be able to pursue those things because they may take us somewhere that we just never anticipated. And I think the laboratories are, again, that wonderful combination of that curiosity-driven research, of being able just to explore what might ever be interesting with that more focus on applied outcomes, and ultimately being able to connect those together so that we can do new things. But yeah, absolutely. More collaboration with the private sector is something that I think is important.
My understanding, and I could be wrong on this, is that, and I was speaking of technology transfer, and the simple mindedness that I have about it is if the lab were to develop something that it really couldn't commercialize it, but it could license it to someone to commercialize that. Is that correct?
Yeah, we have opportunities to do that as well, and that's actually very important in a lot of the work that we do. I'll actually talk about another laboratory for a second.
Okay.
Ames Laboratory in Iowa. Ames is the one that came up with the formulations for lead-free solder.
Oh, really?
And, that has been commercialized by licensing that technology to all sorts of private sector partners.
Sure.
But they're the ones that invented that. So that's a great example of tech transfer in that type of thing.
Well, what have I not asked you about that you think is important for people to know about the lab or you? Let me ask you, how many employees do you have?
The lab is actually, it's a big place. It's that's another one of the great things about being here. There are about 7,400 UT Battelle employees here at Oak Ridge National Laboratory. The Oak Ridge Reservation includes not only Oak Ridge National Laboratory, it also includes Y12 operated by NNSA. And environmental management has also got a strong effort here, cleaning up the legacy of the Manhattan Project and the Cold War.
Yeah.
So any given day here on site, we've got about 10,000 people. And that's a combination of people who work directly for Oak Ridge National Laboratory, the UT Battelle employees, people who are working on the EM mission, scientific users of our scientific user facility, collaborators, visitors. It's always a busy place, and it's always something new every day.
I'm glad you brought that up, talking about cleanup, because they're pretty well finished with the K25 site. I mean, they're really close to that.
Yeah, that's a great success story.
Yeah, and I know they've got a lot of work to do at Y12. What are they doing? And I'm sure there's legacy work that has to be done. On this campus as well. Talk a little bit about that.
So one of the missions at the laboratory that we really haven't talked a lot about is actually, again, coming from the Cold War, from the Manhattan Project, is obviously we were home for the graphite reactor X10. And the reactor that we still operate is called the high flux isotope reactor. And one of the missions that the laboratory has had, again, as part of the Manhattan Project, what we were doing was irradiating uranium in a reactor to produce plutonium and separating that plutonium from the uranium. And that's an isotope problem. It's basically, can we create this new element, plutonium, and then separate it out from its parent? And that research at the laboratory has continued and has actually grown tremendously because of political reasons. Over the last few years. It used to be that Russia supplied a lot of the world's isotopes, and Russia is not exactly a friendly country these days to most of the world. So more and more of that mission for supplying the isotopes that not only the U.S. needs, but the rest of the Western world needs are actually made here at Oak Ridge National Laboratory. It's a little bit of always a little bit of a double-edged sword. So, when was the last time you were swiped for explosives at the airport?
Yeah, that's true.
The isotope that powers that machine, it's an iron isotope. Don't quote me on the isotope.
Sure.
But the isotope that goes into that machine is actually made here at Oak Ridge National Lab and supplied around the Western Hemisphere.
Yeah.
And if you look at a lot of the cleanup mission that's left here, part of it is around the reactors that we've had, but the
and there have been several reactor projects over the
is
years,
it 13 reactors over the history of the laboratory.
Mm-hmm.
So there's the cleanup of that legacy, including finishing up the cleanup of the graphite reactor and the plutonium separation. But a lot of the cleanup that's going on right now is cleaning up the old isotope buildings that have not been used for years, that have pretty serious contamination in them.
Sure.
And EM is doing a great job with that. UCOR, their contractor, does a wonderful job with that.
And one of the reactors that was a pet project of Alvin Weinberg, the molten salt reactor, it's having a renewed sense of possibility, isn't it?
Those are big footsteps to follow in. So I think Alvin was just decades ahead of his time. So that's really interesting. If you look at the molten salt reactor experiment, obviously fission companies, nuclear energy companies are interested in molten salt reactors again now. Kairos Energy, which is at K25, is one of those companies. But the constituents of that salt, fluorine, lithium, and beryllium, so-called FLiBe, the lithium is actually interesting for tritium breeding. One of the things that they figured out very early on is if you were going to use molten salt in fission reactors, you wanted a particular isotope of lithium that did not produce tritium. The converse is true for fusion. In fusion, what you're trying to do is get deuterium and tritium to fuse. You can get deuterium from seawater, but tritium you get from nuclear reactions. So fusion reactors have to breed tritium if they're going to be sustainable. So we're actually starting to look at those same salts as the potential way to use those in fusion to breed tritium for fusion reactors. So it's really fascinating to see that that research actually not only come back, but start to expand tremendously right now.
We mentioned the nuclear renaissance, and we've got, half a dozen to a dozen companies that are locating, private companies that are locating here. How is that? Why is that? Why do you think that's important? And how can that be beneficial with them being this close to the lab and you being this close to them?
I think people often lose sight of the fact that even in this day and age where, we can just get on the cell phone and talk to somebody instantaneously, so much about science and technology depends on creativity. And it's running into somebody at the supermarket and saying, I hadn't seen you for a while. What are you working on? And, we got this problem we're trying to solve. And, somebody from the lab side saying, hey, actually, I think I have an idea about that. So you need people to be together. And I think one of the great things about this region right now is we have the lab as an anchor. We have University of Tennessee as an anchor. We have our great partners in the community colleges around here that are also part of that anchor system. And we have these companies that are moving in that are just building up this tremendous depth of expertise, almost like Silicon Valley did in the Bay Area. And I think the reason that worked is because you had everybody working on the same thing that built up all the support system that was necessary to do that. And one of the things that's also, I think, important is because of the history of the Manhattan Project, the people in this region really understand nuclear energy. And because they understand it, they're not afraid of it. So companies can come in here and be part of the community and have reputations that they should have, rather than be that evil nuclear company that's, supposedly going to pollute the environment.
And don't you think, and I mentioned this to a person I was interviewing yesterday, I said, don't you think that it may be a generational thing too? Because you've got a newer, an up-and-coming generation who's really important about green energy and clean energy, and they don't have the stigma that was attached to those of us who were around in the 70s and 80s.
I'll tell you a funny story.
Okay.
It's interesting you brought that up. So starting with my time at Argonne National Laboratory. Argonne is in Chicago. Chicago is a big metropolitan area. The other laboratory that's around Chicago is Fermilab, which does high-energy physics. And if you go to anybody in Chicago and say, what's the national laboratory around here, they'll go Fermilab. And you'll say, what about Argonne? And they'll go, who? Just doesn't really have much visibility. Similarly, if you tell somebody in the Bay Area that you're from SLAC, they go, oh, that's my favorite social media app, SLACK. They may or may not have heard about SLAC, the National Laboratory, but that's not what they think of.
Right.
If you go to Oak Ridge, people know about Oak Ridge National Laboratory. And my son, when he was in Chicago, his friends found out his dad was going to go work for Oak Ridge National Laboratory. And they were thrilled because they were molten salt reactor junkies.
Oh, yeah.
I kid you not. They were like, you have to tell us everything you know about molten salt reactors. Can we come visit? I mean, they were just, I'm not kidding you. They were just literally over the moon that they knew somebody who's going to work at Oak Ridge National Laboratory. And I think it gets back to that point that there really is a generational change in how nuclear energy is perceived that's real.
Yeah, absolutely. And the reason that people are here is because it's been here for 80 years.
Yep.
And most of our family have worked here.
Yep.
You know, our cousins, our mothers, our brothers, or aunts, you know, somebody has worked either here or at Y12.
Absolutely. Or K25.
Or K25, you know, and had a good life.
Yep.
You know,
and
being a part of this.
And, I'll give a shout out to University of Tennessee. University of Tennessee was the first nuclear engineering department in the nation because of their relationship to what was going on in the Manhattan Project.
Sure.
The more that people know about technology, I think the more realistic they are about it. And we get out of some of the irrational fear that people naturally will have.
And also, I mean, you know, this was 40 years ago. It was, it was scary stuff.
Yep.
It had the potential to be scary stuff. I'm not saying it's completely and totally safe now, but we've had 40 years of technology and evolution in the science of nuclear.
Yeah, and it's, and I think, one of the things that people also around here will appreciate is safety is always relevant. If you want to make something perfectly safe, you have to spend literally an infinite amount of money on it.
Oh, sure.
And nuclear has always been a safe technology. We understand how to make it even safer and to do so at a lower cost than we did 40 years ago, exactly as you point out.
Yeah.
But the other thing that people remember around here, just to give you an example, is the collapse of the ash ponds at the TVA Bull Run site.
Yeah.
And that was a huge environmental catastrophe. So I think there's an understanding that, any way we produce energy has its benefits and its costs. And people have a much more realistic sense of what those relative costs and benefits are. And I think, the statistics are very clear that, coal is in many ways much in economic and in health impact. Nuclear is much better.
Yeah.
And we got to keep pushing on that curve to make it really economically viable and to demonstrate that this is a power source that the United States can depend on. And it's a lot of fun to be at the heart of that.
And we still get in our cars and drive, which is a lot more risky than nuclear.
Oh, absolutely. The most dangerous thing anybody here at Oak Ridge National Laboratory does on any given day is drive to and from work. Absolutely.
That's exactly right.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, is there anything else you want to add?
You've got me.
All right.
You've got all my topics.
Well, great. Well, thank you.